Well, thank you, the Gallaghers, as the dulcet tones of cigarettes and alcohol, there it goes, disappears back into the distance. We can now talk about cigarettes and alcohol, a la the consultative democracy model, which is a really interesting little detour that, frankly, I probably spent far too much time with, because I find it just fascinating. This is a really, really interesting insight into how the consultative democracy process works in the UK, and the problems that arise from it. Specifically, that consultative democracy is all very well as long as it's a level playing field. And frankly, what we find is that it is anything but a level playing field. Now, here we're looking at two expressions of individual morality, individual choice, the idea of smoking, the idea of boozing. One of these is revenue positive. That's revenue positive to the state. The other is profoundly revenue negative. Boozing, the effects of boozing cost a huge amount in terms of the state, in terms of health and social costs. Smoking, on the other hand, is actually revenue positive. The duty and early death incurred through smoking substantially outweighs the health costs. So ideally the government, well, oh gosh, this is cynical, but you could argue that it's much better as far as the government's concerned that people smoke rather than that they booze. The more people that smoke, the more money the government saves. The more people drink, the more government spends, which seems a bit odd when we come to look at what happens next. Anyway, let's deal with smoking first. And this is one of the reasons why I like this so much. It's a balanced debate. We've got people on both sides. So we've got business groups on the pro-smoking side, the Tobacco Manufacturers Association, and we've got the BMA on the other side. And then we've got these sock puppets, the AstroTurf, the fake grassroots movement, Freedom Organisation for the Right to Enjoy Smoking Tobacco, which is funded largely by the TMA. And we've got sock puppets on the other side. ASH is largely funded by government via the BMA. And grassroots, you've got organisations like the Manifesto Group, which is generally sort of a group that is in favour of minimum government regulation. It's not necessarily in favour of smoking, but what it doesn't like is people telling it what to do. This is where it gets interesting. The sort of grassroots action on smoking is minimal. There's not really a huge amount of grassroots support for the anti-smoking movement. Which may be quite telling. Anyway, we'll come to that in due course, because what we found is that the pro-smoking debate has taken a bit of a kicking, really. Essentially, we have this consultative democracy. How is the government going to manage smoking? And there's no ideological steer on this, because it's a question of freedom, and neither the Conservatives nor the Liberal, neither the Conservatives nor the Labour government or the Labour government are particularly keen on freedom. But on this occasion, where there's no clear ideological steer, the government opens up consultations from interested parties, and those consultations will inform policy. And the policy has been as follows. In 2003, tobacco advertising, any advertising was banned. Tobacco advertising on TV was banned way back in the 70s. But now you couldn't even have a billboard, you couldn't have magazine articles, nothing at all. So in 2003, tobacco advertising was banned. 2006, the Health Act banned smoking in public places, 2 years after Scotland. There's another Public Health Act in 2009, which means that you can't display tobacco products at point of sale, which is why we all have to have those screens up, although there was obviously a bit of a delay before that came in. In 2010, the government planned to introduce plain packaging, and then it backed down on plain packaging. And then in the Children and Families Act, plain packaging was back on the agenda, and it also banned smoking in cars carrying children. So What we've got here is an assault by the government on smokers. Now, I'm not going to, I have no dog in this fight. I don't smoke. In fact, none of my family do. So I really don't care. I do, however, care about where my money goes. And I'm particularly interested in who is telling the government what it should do. So here, for whatever reason, the government has decided to embrace the anti-smoking movement, and we've seen this slew of legislation that has essentially limited the rights of people to spark up a fag at home, in their car, and indeed at or in public places. It's not a bad thing. I don't mind the fact that I come home perhaps from a quiet night out with a couple of friends, and I don't stink of fags. That's not a bad thing. But the question is, why was it, if smoking is cost positive, as far as the government is concerned, that they clamped down so hard on cigarette smoking? Now, you could argue that it's because cigarette smoking is very bad for you, and I wouldn't dispute that at all. But let's talk a little bit about booze. Booze is arguably worse for you than smoking, certainly in terms of social cost. Booze has a monumental cost in that people don't smoke a packet of fags and start a fight. People don't smoke a packet of fags and then break up families. Booze, on the other hand, does that. Booze is responsible for monumental social costs as well as health costs. And yet we see the government bending over backwards to accommodate the booze industry. Now, I do have a dog in this fight. I like a glass of wine as much as the next person. I like a pint of beer possibly more than the next person. But again, the question here is not whether I like booze or whether I like wine, but rather who is pulling the government's strings. And again, rather like the smoking debate, we have both sides of the argument represented at all levels. Pro booze, you've got our Wine and Spirits Trade Association. And we've also got some think tanks. This is where it gets interesting. The think tanks are piling in here. Who they're being paid by, we don't know. Well, we do in some instances. But that's worth noticing there. The think tanks are coming out in favor, by and large, of the booze side of the equation. These are all libertarian think tanks. Oh, no big government, freedom for people to smoke and drink. Well, where were they when people were talking about smoking? That's what I don't really understand. There's also an APPG called the Beer Group, and I have a tremendous amount of sympathy with anything that calls itself the Beer Group, but again, it's out there, it's being represented. Sock Puppets, AstroTurf, I haven't really found any evidence of that. And Grassroots, of course, got CAMRA, again, another organisation that's close to my heart. And yeah, I kind of lost interest at that point. On the other side of the equation, we've got professional organisations again. We've got the British Medical Health Association. That is, of course, the Doctors' Union, same lot as we're anti-smoking. We've also got some sock puppets and some AstroTurf here. We've got the Alcohol Concern, which is a charity funded largely by the BMA and the government, and also the Alcohol Healthcare Alliance, which is a sort of umbrella group for various other groups, also itself largely funded by the BMA and the Department of Health. Grassroots, again, can't really find anything on the anti-booze side, although the temperance movement, if it's still around, I try to avoid them whenever possible. Maybe they're involved, who knows? Anyway, the main point here is that in 2010, the Scottish government proposed a minimum alcohol price in Scotland, and it came in. In 2012, the government said it was going to do the same thing in the rest of the country to try to cut excessive alcohol consumption. Here we're talking principally about the alcohol sales, the alcohol sales from supermarkets. It's about prevs. It's about people going out and necking a slab of cheap lager before they go out. And making a thorough nuisance of themselves. It's less about responsible drinking in pubs and more about people necking a pint of Bacardi and then going out and starting a fight. Anyway, in 2012, the government unveils these ambitious plans to cut excessive alcohol consumption by introducing this minimum alcohol price. At that point, the WSTA, with which we're all familiar, launches an all-out offensive on government and parliament. That's entirely within its rights to do so. It can do so. That's why the Wine and Spirits Trade Association exists. So one can't get too upset about that, I suppose. But at the same time, the BMA goes on a similar assault, and they pull out all the stops to try to argue for the other side of the equation. In November 2012, we have a formal 10-week consultation. And shortly after the end of that, the government shelves its plans, claiming there's no concrete evidence that a minimum alcohol price will work. Instead, we get that token gesture there. No one really is selling it below the cost of alcohol duty and VAT. Insane. What really happened is very, very interesting. Now, these are all highlights from the BMJ report into this particular thing, and you are more than welcome to peruse that should you like. This is the report here. It's called Under the Influence. And if you would like a copy, just see me and I'll get it for you. It is very, very long, I do warn you. But it is very, very interesting. And essentially what they're saying is that they were stitched up. The health lobby was entirely stitched up by the booze lobby, who just got their act together and basically did a much better job. So what did they do? Well, we've got reports from the Adam Smith Institute, from the Center of Economic Policy, Economics and Business Research, sorry, from Demos. We've got the Wine and Spirits Trade Association itself getting in. We've got dozens of meetings between industry representatives at all levels with the Department of Health and the Department of Trade and Industry. And we've got the APPG, which itself received 40 grand from various pubcos and brewers. It's extraordinary. What we're looking at here is a concerted effort on behalf of the booze industry to torpedo this particular policy. And they did a great job, because that's exactly what happened. The government consultation was just, what should the price be? They were going in on the soft, and they got absolutely kicked. But 130 meetings between the Department of Health and the drinks industry that were not part of the public record. We had more meetings between ministers and industry reps. We got Jeremy Hunt there meeting people from ASDA to discuss alternative measures. Basically, as I said, the WSTA did a job on government, and it all really comes down, I think, or a lot of it seems to come down to this chap here, Miles Beale. This is him. We can follow his career on LinkedIn. So that's not LinkedIn, this is him here. And he is Chief Executive of the Wine and Spirits Trade Association, but perhaps more importantly, we can see that he really started his career in the civil service. And he worked his way up through various civil service departments to be Deputy Director of EU and International Agriculture Policy at DEFRA. That's a huge position. And a very, very influential guy. And then in 2012, he jumped ship. He was presumably headhunted by the WSTA. They said, this is a man who knows the corridors of Whitehall. He's the man to spearhead our campaign against the minimum alcohol pricing. And yeah, he did one heck of a job, and you can't deny that. Whether or not you think it's good for democracy is essentially where we're coming in. And what we're finding, I think, is that overall, it's not what you know, but who you know and how you know it. What we've got here is is all about access. It's all about being able to mobilize various forces to do a job on government. And the Wine and Spirits Trade Association did an amazing job on government, a much better job than the Tobacco Manufacturers Association did, which is why cigarettes are having the living daylights regulated out of them at the minute, while you can still buy a can of super strength, cheap, nasty rat lager from Tesco's for tuppence halfpenny and get bombed out of that, and then go and start a fight in the city centre, break up families, knock a policeman's helmet off, and generally put yourself in hospital. It doesn't make sense. But hey, it's British politics. Who said it ever had to make sense? And on that bombshell, I look forward to your questions. Now remember, I've gone into this in far too much detail. This is not something you're going to go into at this level of detail in the exam, but nevertheless, it makes you think. Speak to you soon. Bye.